Welcome to Teachers Talk Money, where a millennial high school teacher and a Gen X elementary teacher get together to talk all things money.
From salary scales to saving, investing, and self-care, we're here to help teachers master their money. I'm Christy.
And I'm Rachel, and we're so glad you're here.
Hey, Rachel, how was your week?
Hey, Christy. I had a pretty good week. I got to meet up with some teacher friends yesterday, and it really lifted my spirits. These are a couple of younger women in my school building that I have been meaning to hang out with for forever because, we've just been talking about, we should meet up and hang out as sort of like the newer teachers at GHS, my building. And it never really happened, because we're busy and then because there was a pandemic. And so it just took a long time to figure out how to do it in a way that made sense for us and was safe. And I am so glad that we were able to finally meet up because we could talk about all of our different experiences. We all work in different content areas. It was just really, really positive to be able to talk about our distance learning experiences with each other and just hang out and blow off some steam. So that was absolutely lovely. How was your week, Christy?
Well, I'm so glad to hear, first of all, that you are keeping those connections with teachers, even though, because you guys are fully remote right now, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It's so great to hear that teachers are staying connected and that you're connecting with each other, because I completely couldn't make it through my days without my teacher girls. So yeah, good. I'm glad you guys got together. My week was pretty standard. I did manage to transfer the money into our IRA accounts for 2020, and I'm waiting for the markets to open during this week so that I can continue and distribute those dollars to where I want them to go. So that's always an exciting time of year for us because we do it kind of all at once based on what David earns since he's self-employed. So it's always fun to be like, yay, it's the time. And you make the transfer and then you're like, oh, I got to wait a week, for it to clear. And then you got to wait to have a weekday and find some time there. But it's just a couple clicks once you have your system set up. So I'm really looking forward to getting that done. We do have until April 15th is tax day. And that's the last day you can contribute to your IRAs for the previous year. So if you haven't done that yet and you want to, you've got some time.
Oh, I just want to say that is so exciting to me because I can't even imagine how much anticipation goes into that when you do it in sort of a yearly lump sum. I do my Roth IRA contributions in lump sums as well because that is where I dump money from like my stipends or recently like stimulus checks or tax refunds, any sort of lump sum of money I get that I put it mostly towards my investments. And it's so exciting for me when that finally happens. So I cannot even imagine your anticipation at that.
Yes, it's very fun. So what are we talking about today, Rachel?
So, Christy, in this episode, we're going to talk about all of the financial obstacles that are unique to our profession as teachers. Last episode, we talked a lot about this mentality of we didn't get in this for the money. And overall, it's pretty clear, I think, that we're not fans of that because it's so limiting and it so much just shuts the door on conversations that really could empower us to get control of our money. But of course, as with all cliches, it is grounded in some truth. And I think we need to start with acknowledging all of the things that we're up against so that we can sort of one by one tackle them and realize what we do have control over. Because, of course, true financial empowerment is not just saying, well, ignore all of the structural problems and all of the things that are difficult for your specific situation and just focus on what you can do and personal responsibility. And that is valid to an extent because, of course, we want to prioritize and emphasize what we can control. But that doesn't have to come at the cost of completely ignoring the things that are a little bit bigger than us. And yeah, I just feel like I wanted to talk about this stuff first because so much financial advice is all about bootstraps, white knuckling it, taking full responsibility for everything. And that is just not the reality in any profession, and especially in the teaching profession, which is really unique in a lot of ways.
I totally agree. And I love that you wanted to start out this way. To me, it feels like that term, knowing the playing field. If you're trying to get somewhere and your path is not lit and you don't know what you might run into and you don't know, have a skill set to use to work with that obstacle, then you're really setting yourself up for frustration or failure or time delays. And so by laying all of this out today and knowing what we're working with, we can give teachers kind of that big perspective of our setting and what our playing field looks like. And I was also thinking about this episode, and it is tricky because we're teachers, and so we tend to stay in that teacher mode. My sister works in corporate America, though, and I know lots of us have friends and relatives that do, and she has a whole other set of obstacles for her, in terms of negotiating her salary, and she doesn't have job security really, or, there's the whole gender pay gap situation. And so in any profession, whether you're an entrepreneur and have to take out loans, your business could fail, any profession has obstacles. So yes, we want to talk about the obstacles that teachers have and understand that no matter what we did, we'd be having this conversation because everybody has things that are systemic, that are bigger than them, that they have to learn to function within and around.
Absolutely. And I think that there tends to be this idea that you can't focus on both at the same time. Like if you start to talk about the structural issues, then you're just, being a negative Nancy and you're not going to get on top of your finances. And that just isn't true. I mean, it is not a black and white situation. It is a both and kind of moment where you can acknowledge all of the things that are working against you and still find empowerment in the things that you can control. And of course, find empowerment in the fact that you can work to change those structural issues as well. It really does no good for anyone to just pretend like they're not there.
Well said, my friend.
All right, so let's get into it. What are some of these obstacles that we face?
I think the first one that would probably come to a lot of people's mind is the time and energy. Teaching tends to be a very all-consuming job to the point where we really need to be intentional about our time outside of the classroom and setting boundaries. And we cannot wait to talk more about that in the future. But for now, we need to know that, this is not a job where we're sitting at a desk playing video games in between meetings, right? Like there's none of that. There's not time to go to the bathroom. We really need to be able to acknowledge that and just say, hey, we don't have a lot of time and energy outside of the classroom, and certainly not when we're in the classroom on our working hours.
Yes, and taking control of your money, I think because there's such a motivational and cognitive block for us with that, to use some teaching terminology, because it's just a big question mark, I think, for most of us. It seems like something that's going to take all of this time and energy. And in the beginning, yes, in some ways you can certainly chunk it out and make it more manageable. And that's what we hope to do with this podcast. But eventually what actually happens when you start managing your money is that it ends up saving you time and energy. And I also just wanted to add some thoughts because lately I've been making a lot more time for reading than I've been able to in the past, which is pat on the back for me because I'm an English teacher, so I should be kind of consistently reading, right, to model for my students.
No guilt.
But one book I have been reading lately is called Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat by Bruce Staisley. And it's all about kind of different hacks or ideas to sort of re-energize your position in the workplace. And he sort of talks a lot about companies and corporations that employees get burnt out from. And he talks about, eating during lunch or not being able to take breaks from email or working outside of your duty hours. And I was relating to all of it, of course.
I was going to say that all sounds like me.
Absolutely, except all of the jobs he's talking about are like investment banking or Silicon Valley jobs. And I'm like, I'm getting paid hundreds of thousands of dollars less than these people, and yet I feel this so hard. And teacher burnout is so real and just as real as it is in these other professions. And I was just like, dang, this is not fair. I mean, I don't think any professions should be run this way. Obviously, I think it's inhumane and it's not even really productive at a certain point. But it just kind of made me a little enraged because I get paid so much less and I'm feeling the same effects.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I like that you were just a little enraged.
Just a tad enraged.
Just a wee bit enraged. I would totally agree. I mean, I definitely work during my lunch break every day. I mean, that is a reality for me. As a trade-off, though, I work at leaving at 4 and being done.
Yeah.
And that's something that definitely was a long time coming. But I think understanding that when we're teachers, we have to be reasonable in what we're expecting of ourselves. So if you have financial goals and you say, okay, I want to do this week, be realistic about the time and energy that you're going to have to put into it. It is hard to do things during business hours when you're a teacher. My God, try to go to the dentist, try to go to the post office, right? It's just like, it's so hard. So trying to open up an account or trying to call and ask Vanguard a question or trying to make a budget, set aside some time for yourself where you know that will be reasonable, right? Maybe it's a summertime thing or a 3-day weekend thing or one evening if you have your partner put the kids to bed. Trade some time so that you're not putting undue pressure on yourself and be realistic about what you can fit into your week.
100%. And I'm really excited for us. We're going to have an entire episode that's all about sort of setting these boundaries and determining what those boundaries are for you as a teacher. So I'm super stoked to get further into that. But for now, let's move on to our next point, another obstacle that is specific to teachers. And this one includes a couple of other types of jobs as well. But one thing that we have to deal with that in general other professions don't is that we work in a salary scale, which means that our income reflects our years of working as well as our education. And then there are some stipend opportunities thrown in there. What this also means is that our income doesn't reflect the quality of work we're doing, the amount of value we're adding to our school building, or the amount of work we're doing, or how much we're working outside of our duty days. And it also means there isn't any opportunity to negotiate our salary based on the quality of work we're doing or the value that we are adding to the school building.
That was so well said. I completely agree. And I would add that, if anything, the attempts that have been made to pay teachers based on our quote unquote quality are those, merit pay programs where they're paying us based on test scores, which immediately makes every teacher just want to run straight into a wall. Because that's what it feels like, because we know that those standardized tests are not a true reflection of all the things we do in the classroom. So definitely it is a prescribed path and it is fixed and it doesn't fully reflect the parts of our jobs that we do that matter the most.
And I just have to add that I have a personal qualm with the salary scale. I've got some personal beef with this. And that is just that I'm a new teacher, and I think so many new teachers will be able to relate to this, because when you're a new teacher, you tend to work outside of your duty hours even more than tenured teachers because you have to sort of create more lessons. You're getting the hang of grading. You're trying to figure out the systems that work for you. So I work, especially my first year, I worked so much more outside of my duty day than tenured teachers. There were many tenured teachers who would come in as the first bell was ringing and leave as the last bell rang, not come to meetings, not fulfill professional obligations, or even really demonstrate a lot of care or time and energy going into their work for their students. And they're getting paid 20, 30, 40K more than me. So I just have some personal beef because as somebody who takes on so many extra roles, and I've sort of learned to work within my duty day a lot better lately. But even so, it just feels super inequitable that it doesn't matter how much value I add, how much I care about my students. My monetary worth is set lower simply because I'm younger, I haven't been in here as long, and because I still need to get more education, which costs money.
I totally hear you. So keeping in line with that salary scale that we just talked about, we know that teachers make way less than comparable professionals then they should, right? We all agree that teachers should be paid more for a myriad of reasons. I just recently went back and grabbed my contract from 2000 when I started teaching. And I remember just living in this tiny little apartment with David. And like I said in the first episode, just barely making it through the days. And my paycheck was about $750 a month, which meant I was making $22,284, which seemed really low. It didn't seem that low to me at the time. I think because I just had no time to even pay attention to what I was making because I was just trying to get through the days. But in today's dollars, because of inflation and the fact that it was 21 years ago, that would be $34,736 that I would have been bringing home. So obviously that is a ridiculously low amount. And as teachers, we're always negotiating and advocating within our unions, if we have that still in place, to be making more. But the fact is, we just make way less than we should. So, Rachel, do you want to jump in with our average salary as a teacher?
Yep. So we got some data for you guys today. And according to the NEA, the national average salary for a teacher was about $62,000. And this was for the 2018 to 19 school year. And that was a 2.1% increase from the prior school year. Now, I see a number like that, and that doesn't seem too bad to me, partially because I'm an early educator, so I'm not making that much yet. But what sticks out to me is the fact that this only increased 2.1% from last school year. And that immediately brings to mind, for me, the fact that inflation is 3% a year on average. So I can see already that this salary is not keeping up with inflation, or at least it didn't last year. And that to me is a shame, because that is really the bare minimum of what we can do with salary increases, is keep up with inflation, because our money is worth 3% less every year.
Exactly. And I remember I used to be on our negotiations committee for my district, and we would fight tooth and nail and have to go negotiate for months and months and months to get a 2% raise for the next 2 years. And people were like, that's not even keeping up with inflation. And it's not like they're saying, hey, here's your inflationary increase for the next year. Like, the Social Security does that, for heaven's sakes. Like our teacher contracts, we're having to fight tooth and nail oftentimes to get that cost of living increase, which is just, again, not something that is okay. So if we compare that $62,000 as the average teacher wage to the average living wage, which according to MIT for a household with 2 children is roughly $69,000. If you think about a living wage, meaning people can afford rent, they can afford food, transportation, healthcare. The fact that many teachers cannot necessarily get those things for themselves on a teacher's salary alone is definitely an obstacle with a capital O. And we just want to say that that's out there. And we know that getting into it, right? I mean, that's how we started this whole thing, with that persona of teachers not making enough money. And like Rachel said when we started, it is based in fact in large part. So we hear you, and we know that we need to make more, and we are here to bang that drum all day long.
100%. And the part of this that stuck out to me was the fact that this $69K would be a living wage for a household with 2 children. And I think of all the single parent teachers that I know, or just the single income households that I know that teachers belong to. And I 100% absolutely believe that they should be able to support their family on a teacher's salary, because teachers are giving so much of their time, energy, and efforts to really doing a service for our country, or if you're listening to this outside of the US, your country, whatever your country is. It just makes me feel kind of ashamed that we're not even really keeping up with something that would be livable for somebody with 2 children.
Totally agree.
So let's head to the next point, which is that in general, we don't really get a lot of info offered to us about retirement plans or benefits or anything like this. And that might be specific to our experience. It seems to me, with the other teachers that I've talked to in different districts, that theirs was sort of lacking too. But of course, I'm sure there are some districts that are super awesome with this, or some school buildings that are super awesome with this. But
let's hope so. Let's hope that
let's
hope that there's some buildings that are awesome at this.
Yeah, mine wasn't terrible, but my onboarding included almost no mention of it. And of course, you get this information when you're doing in-service week, right? And you're getting ready for the next school year. And obviously, the first thing on your mind is getting ready for the next school year because you've never taught before. As a first-year teacher, I was way too wrapped up in getting my classroom ready, planning my lessons, creating my syllabus, and doing all of these things to prepare myself for the fact that there were going to be students in those chairs in my classroom in the next week, that I was really not thinking, even as a financially oriented person, I was not thinking about these questions. I didn't even know what questions I had.
That's the thing, is it just screams like a Calvin and Hobbes comic strip, it's like comical, like that they're trying to tell us about, and I mean,
Yes.
bless them, right? At least they're trying in some way, but it is really like the worst time to teach us about our retirement options. And then they tell us a tiny little bit. And then also what cracks me up is we're often told by the worst messenger. We're brand new teachers. We don't know anyone in our own building, let alone our own principal,
Yes.
let alone district admin. And someone who works in an office that we probably won't remember their name. We don't know what they do. We don't know where to find them. And so that's the messenger who's saying, here is your 457 or 403B options. And here's your pension information. That is going to, I literally filed it away. And then when I started my blog, I was like, oh, there's a file in my file cabinet that says 403B. I wonder what that is. And I pulled it out and I was like, holy crap, I took some really good notes 20 years ago. And I haven't looked at them since, and I just was shocked because I was like, again, like you, even though I am just on it and wanted to always be paying attention to those things, I had zero mental space to do it. And then there have literally been no follow-ups at all since then. Actually, that's not entirely true. Right now, I'm on a financial committee in my district that is trying to get better providers on board for our 403B and 457 plans. It's super exciting.
Awesome.
I know. I was like, yes, please sign me up. I want to be on that committee. But there's been no consistent like check-ins or, hey, here's this Zoom call right now where you can go and ask questions about the options that you have within your district. And so that is why I think we can really be a good access point for teachers and saying, when you've got the time, listen to these episodes and we will give you the starting points and the questions to ask and help you break down. Often it's intimidating. I have teachers email me all the time about having credits applied to the salary scale or questions about financial things because they don't know who to contact in our district, or they're kind of nervous or afraid about contacting someone in admin because they seem like, the man behind the curtain in The Wizard of Oz. And I'm happy to be that bridge for them. I love it. But I'm hoping that with this podcast, we can be the bridge for a lot of other teachers and say, hey, that man behind the curtain is just a dude waiting for you to ask him a question. And that's his job to answer it, And so this is an obstacle for sure. And it is, I think, one of the easiest and most fun to work around because we can be here to help teachers bridge that gap and fill in those missing points of information.
Totally. I completely remember getting a packet about all the retirement stuff, 403B, 457, pension, all of that stuff. I looked in it. I didn't understand a single word and I just closed it and put it on myself.
I wonder how many teachers out there are nodding their heads right now and raising their hands and being like, yep, me too. It's so hard.
Yes, exactly. And again, like I'm somebody who was already pretty interested in this, already sort of educating myself on what these different things meant. And I was like, this is confusing and I don't understand it. And I'm too busy to worry about it right now. So there's that. And then there's the second piece of it, which is that money is not really a super common topic of conversation among coworkers, aside from the whole, oh, you can get cheap classroom decor at here or use your Michaels discount. But it all tends to be, in my opinion, everything that I hear in my building about money is, ways to save it because we're all in this mentality of we don't make a lot of money, right?
Yeah. And it is a taboo. And again, that's why I'm so excited to be here, is because I want to ditch that taboo. I want us to just say, let's reinvent this conversation for ourselves so that we can do so much more than that first meeting when we first got hired a bajillion years ago, because there are so many ways we can be advocating for ourselves and helping each other. So I'm just hoping that's what we can do here.
Yeah. And what this is bringing to mind for me is even a moment in my onboarding process. We went to a thing called NEO, New Educators Orientation. I don't know if other districts do this or if it's just my district, but we had 2 extra days added onto our in-service that first year. And there was definitely a Q&A session, but it was like Q&A about anything, like about bell schedules, about curriculum, about financial stuff. So I remember being like, I want to ask some questions about financial stuff, but I definitely felt like I didn't even know what my questions were because I was so confused about all of it and my mind was running in a million places. And B, that I felt like I would stick out if I was the only person who's not, oh, I need to know this about the curriculum. I need to know this about classroom management. And I started talking about money, which is this thing that we see like as like greedy, right? Or wrong, or, money is
It's just
evil.
not part of the conversation. I think you're spot on. I mean, I can envision you in that room right now having those thoughts, and I wouldn't feel comfortable either because it's just it's not the canon that we use. It's not part of our known world that we're talking about as teachers. So next on our list, Rachel, is pensions. Dun, dun, dun.
So much fun. I'm so excited.
Yeah, and we want to start by saying that we are aiming for a general overview here. Pensions vary widely from state to state. So this is kind of our experience and what we know, and we definitely encourage you to seek out the specifics for your state when you're learning about your pension options. So, Rachel, I know pensions can be limiting because of age and the years of service requirements. And as a younger teacher, I know you're thinking about that in your future. So tell us kind of what your take on pensions is.
Yeah, so again, it's so different for everybody, and you have to figure out your own specific situation. But for me, I'm considering my pension in terms of the fact that I know that I want to retire early at some point. I don't know what my target retirement date is because obviously I'm also just sort of still getting into teaching and stuff. I just know that I don't want to do the traditional job forever. So when I'm looking into my pension, I looked at like the minimum years of requirements. And for me, I have to work for 15 years in the district to qualify. And then if I retire at that point or any point before I've been there for 25 full years, then they take 6% off for every year that I'm retired early. And for me, this means that, even if I got an 8% rate of return through that money being invested, then I would only be netting 2% by the time I take it out, which is not even keeping up with inflation, as we mentioned before.
Yeah, not so fantastic.
Yeah. And so for me, it's not really a benefit because it's like, honestly, basically like a savings account. And I could be putting all of those, thousands of dollars that I have invested in there now into my 457 or into IRAs, and I could get a better rate of return there. So for me, it's not really a benefit. I mean, it's nice to know that the money's there and I can withdraw the contributions I've made. But in terms of it being like this thing that's supposed to help me in retirement, it's just not going to be that. And then the second point I wanted to make is that I'm not the only teacher who's going to leave teaching early. I mean, and maybe it's not even because other teachers are considering early retirement, but so many teachers leave even before they've been there for 5 years, And so I think it's this thing that we all think, oh, I've got my pension, it's so great. But that's not the reality for what a lot of people are actually going to see.
Yeah, and that fact that it is for savings means that no matter how long you're in it, if you don't make it to that benefit point, it is taking that money from you whether you want to or not. And so that's definitely an inflexibility piece of it that can make it really tricky for teachers who aren't following that full career path. And then on top of that, not all pensions provide an adequate post-retirement wage, and it's well worth logging into whatever your portal is for your state and estimating what that wage will be so that you know how much planning you need to do in addition to your pension. And a lot of teachers think, okay, well, I've got Social Security and my pension. And in many places that's true, but there are 15 states that have chosen not to opt into Social Security for their state employees. And I'll just read them really quick because I'm wondering if some of our listeners are thinking, am I in one of those states? And so they are Alaska, California, Colorado, Connecticut, some areas of Georgia, Illinois, some areas of Kentucky, Louisiana, Maine, Massachusetts, Missouri, Nevada, Ohio, some areas of Rhode Island, and Texas. So not that Social Security is like the be all end all. We all know that it is also in jeopardy and uncertain, especially for younger people. But it's good always to know what you're working with. If you don't have Social Security coming out of your check, you have more money to work with. And if you do have Social Security coming out of your check, you know you can plan to whatever level you feel comfortable on that being there for you in retirement.
Totally. I was today years old when I learned this. That some states exclude their teachers from Social Security because of the pension. That's really interesting. And yeah, like you said, that can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how old you are and how much Social Security will be underfunded by the time you retire and all of that stuff. So the other point about pensions is that they are underfunded, meaning there's just a big question mark as to whether or not your pension is going to be able to pay you through retirement. And in the show notes, we've linked an article from Pew Trust that just goes state by state and tells you how well funded your pension is in that state. So if you want to check that out, head to the show notes. And it's just another way of saying, like, it's not going to pay you the full retirement wage, depending on how underfunded it is. And almost all the states are some percentage underfunded, and then some are better off than others.
Yep, definitely just another good point to check on. And then finally, not all pensions are standard pensions anymore. I know some states have an option that's more like a 401k where teachers can choose to opt in or not. And so that could be an advantage because teachers have more choice, and also a disadvantage because you might get less funding from your district. You might have fewer choices on what you can invest in, and it'll take more effort from teachers. And we've talked about how already we want this to be easy and straightforward. So kind of to wrap it up, just make sure you know what you're working with. Do a quick Google search or call your state's teacher retirement service. You can find out a ton of information just by Googling years to be vested in my state's pension. I've gotten a lot of good information that way.
Okay, so let's wrap up the episode and talk once again about, just give us a little bit of perspective on these obstacles. And I think for me, the main takeaway is just like in our first episode when we were talking about limited salaries, it's because of these very obstacles that it's more important that we take control of our money. So this is not an episode we want you guys to listen to and be like, well, I give up, because clearly it's way too hard to be in control of my money as a teacher, because it's not impossible. Christy and I are both models of how possible it is, but also because it's harder, it's more important that we get a hold of it, period.
Amen. And I would agree, or I would add that because it's harder, we need to be able to help each other even more. And so we want to, again, I just have this vision in my mind of teachers coming together and helping each other and answering each other's questions and communicating and building this reserve of knowledge that we can use to capitalize on all of the things that are within our control and all of the strategies we can use to try and change the system and work within it at the same time. And so I am so excited about this teacher tribe that already exists and maximizing that so that we can help each other make the most of what we have, because it is possible to make changes and to grow into a financial future that you're really excited about. And we're here to help you do that.
Yeah, beautifully put. So stay tuned for the next episode when we'll actually talk about the positive side of some of these things, so you don't just leave here on a super sour note.
For sure. We know the playing field now. Let's get playing.
Yes.
Thanks so much for joining us here on Teachers Talk Money.
Subscribe now to make sure you don't miss a future episode.
Leave us a review of this podcast. It helps more teachers find us.
Share it with a teacher friend who can use some of this information.
You can find more money advice from Christy at Financially Fit Teacher on Instagram and Rachel at Teachers Talk Money on Instagram and YouTube.
All opinions are our own, and our awesome theme music is by John Bartman.